So yeah, last year's talk was a magic show as well as a presentation, but I'm afraid no magic this year. This year I've got something a little bit more personal, a bit more serious, but also, I hope, illuminating and helpful. It's about what Alzheimer's teaches us about security. But before I kind of go into that a little, let's just try and work out where the origin of this comes from. You've already heard Rob rant about this. This was a slide that I got. My background, actually, by the way, Rob, not even close. My background was 25 years in media and the arts. So the idea that he is the most cybersecurity virgin or inexperienced one in this room, absolutely not. To be fair, I did have computers, and just ensure I have some credentials for you. I did have computer science in my background. I did it as part of my degree. I've actually run security and IT transformation projects for pretty much all of the organisations that I've worked in, including the BBC. It just never was in my job title. I just got asked to do them because of my own background and interest. This annoys me for some of the reasons that Rob talked me about. First of all, human error. It's absolutely fundamentally the wrong way to look at it. The statistic, 95%, I would probably argue, I wasn't entirely sure. It was IBM, by the way. He didn't know who it was from. It was from IBM in 2014. I'm not entirely sure that the statistic was well sourced. And, of course, they're Americans, and so therefore they can't spell recognise correctly. It drove me to try and understand. Well, I wanted to understand what is it about that 95%, and why is it that I look around, and just as Rob was saying, that we're seeing the focus of our socio-technical system on the technology, not saying it's not useful, really important, but actually there seemed to be so little focus on people. So very much kind of those origins that Rob was talking about at the end there. So I kind of started looking at various psychological, and I'm not an expert in psychology, so you can kind of, and one of the theories that I'm going to touch on here is dual process theory. That basically breaks it. Kahneman, building on previous people as well, but he divided our thinking up into system one thinking, which is essentially a very fast, and again, 95% of our thinking is rooted in our system one thinking. And then there's the system two. The problem is that we trick ourselves. We think we're doing a lot of system two. We think we're being very analytical and working things through. The truth is, a lot of our thinking is emotional. It is based in that system one thinking, and we're then backfilling it with the system two. Now, I would say, our colleague over here will probably say to me as well, actually, there is to some degree an element by which this dual process theory has been criticised for being slightly naive, for missing a lot of the nuance. I would say, yeah, that's absolutely right, but it's a really good, easy concept, I think, upon which we can kind of get hold of some concepts. We don't need to be completely psychology experts. We've got those people out there who are doing that, but I think it gives us something to get hold of in part of that people issue that Rob was talking about. It also got me thinking about the biology of it all as well. And so therefore, it was probably not surprising when, in summer of 2024, so nearly 2 years ago now, my mum was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Suddenly, very much overnight, although we'd had some concerns about the kind of usual forgetfulness. I have that myself anyway. So, but suddenly we had a dramatic turn in the way that she was behaving and understanding who she was with, i.e., her husband Peter, and just not recognising him. Quite distressing. It led to her going into hospital. So this picture is in actual fact taken just outside one of the units down at the Royal Lancaster Infirmary on a beautiful sunny day. It was one of the first days that we actually managed to get Mum off the ward. Mum's background, by the way, was as a nurse. of geriatric patients. She had nursed a huge number of people with dementias and Alzheimer's in her past. And so when she was in the hospital, she was actually thinking that she was there to provide advice to the nurses who were in there. She didn't see herself as a patient in there. She saw herself as somebody who had come in to guide. And why wasn't she allowed home from this job that she'd suddenly been given to her? Actually, that's one of the major issues that we've had, but I'll maybe touch on that if I have time. But why am I bringing together Alzheimer's and cybersecurity? Obviously, there's a very personal story for me for both. My background was around people, rather largely. That's why I started asking the people questions. And then I've got my mum who's got Alzheimer's. So Oliver Sacks did a lot of very famous studies which looked at people who had mental disorders, problems. And his interest there was not just about helping those people, although that was very much a motivation. But by us understanding the diseased brain, we also help to understand the working brain. Because if we break our bone, we go into the hospital, we have an x-ray, we understand what's going on with that bone. If we've got heart problems, we put electrodes on our system. We can also scan as well, but we look at the results of those and we understand what's going on with that heart. Very much more difficult to do that with the brain and the way that we think, the way that we make decisions. But I was inspired by Oliver and the work that he'd done. These, by the way, these are books. I don't know whether any of you remember those pieces of paper with print on. But a huge amount of literature. Also, the person who was the psychotherapist in the Awakenings film. Also, for those of you who've got a classical bent, they're the subject of an opera called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, in fact, the subject of this particular book here. So by bringing those together, we can maybe understand a little bit about what the functioning of the healthy brain is. So just a very quick primer to what actually is happening with Alzheimer's. Your neurons are basically got two key processes that are happening. You've got chemicals that are essentially wrapping around the neurons and preventing them from communicating to other neurons. And then you have tau tangles, which are going on within the neurons and essentially degrading it. And that ultimately leads to the kind of the loss of memory mass, the brain mass. And essentially the output of it is memory loss. Although I would actually say it's interesting that it's not always loss so much as that the memories are fragile. It's like that they're not able, the chemicals are not firing and they're not able to access those memories rather than having been lost. So actually that comes in waves. And sometimes my mum is perfectly clear thinking. And by the way, actually, it's something else. This is not a madness. I don't perceive this as a madness that my mum is experiencing. Actually, a lot of what she is asking is enormously rational. It's just based on the fact that she can't access that memory that the person in front of her is her husband, or that she had been married, or where she is. So, of course, what she wants to do in that context is she wants to go home. So it's a perfectly rational thing we would all want to do, right? I mean, but it's actually basis is in the loss. So some common themes really around both what I perceive as some common themes around sort of both Alzheimer's and security, that sense of uncertainty, that your current approaches will work for a certain period of time, and that you'll be able to assist, and then suddenly they'll stop. Complete surprise. You don't, suddenly my mum is immensely surprised. Why am I here? How did I get here? What did I do? A limited capacity to adapt because actually, in terms of your energy levels, in terms of your thinking, it's limited about what you can achieve. Therefore, you have balancing priorities, and also that actually your experience of this is affected by those who are around you. It's a dynamic system. It's not a linear system. Well, that actually seems to reflect also a concept called resilience engineering, and there's somebody called David D. Woods who's done a huge amount of work here, and it seemed to me that actually, when we looked at it, there was a fairly close read across from the principles that underpin the thinking around resilience engineering to those experiences, those common experiences that I was finding within the information security, by the way, and Alzheimer's. So, actually, really important this, because we currently, as you will most of you be aware, I suspect, we're currently there is a bill going through the House. The Houses of Parliament just at the moment, the Cybersecurity and Resilience Act. And actually what resilience engineering tells us is that people are absolutely critical to your organisational to resilience. And yet, if you look through that bill, if you look through the codes of conduct, if you look through the guidance and the standards that we all work from, just as Rob was saying earlier on, the people are often absent from that, really. So what are the observations and lessons? Memory is fragile. It needs constant cues to reinforce their recall. So why are we building security systems that are based around the ability of our staff to remember that that segment of a document is one of 100 information security documents? Even the people who wrote those documents will not be able to get you to that right part. They have no way of getting to that. They can't recall it. So why are we expecting people whose jobs are not cybersecurity, are not information security, why are we expecting them to be able to remember that? So what can we do? Well, actually, let's just start from a point whereby actually forgetting things is perfectly normal. It's a perfectly human thing to do. So can we actually remove the blame for that and actually provide guidance and prompts that are delivered to users at the moment that they need it, rather than necessarily have them having to remember what to do from a previous point? Is there an ability, for example, a rhetorical question, is there an ability for us to put a button that will report through an email very simply? Rather than having to remember the email address that, convoluted, by the way. How many convoluted email addresses have we seen about which address to send a phishing email or anything to? Let's make it simple, and not complex. So, for example, do we really need 100 level InfoSec documents, or could we start with a basic set of 10 principles at the very top that lead us through, at the very least, lead us through on a journey through to a more detailed set of policy? Constantly, my mum is craving, obviously, being with her husband. The fact that she doesn't remember who he is the key problem, but also that sense of routine. So let's understand that people do trust what is familiar. They're looking for those things that are familiar, even when they're necessarily wrong, right? So the QR code it looks perfectly familiar. I think that looks all right. Well, I can scan it. So what can we do about it? Normalize that pausing. Again, something you mentioned in your talk, Ellie. Just stop, think, before you proceed. Just make sure that we're encouraging people to do that, particularly in the situation of a request that seems out of the ordinary. So rather than teaching people not to do something, let's teach them the positive of what behaviours we would like them to do. Okay? Make that verification a habit. And then I would say, I've not seen this, so this may be something that everybody's implementing. I haven't come across it. two-channel verification. It's the behaviours equivalent of MFA. Yeah? If you've got a request that feels in any way unusual, or the timing of it is unusual, or something about it does not feel right to you, let's go and verify it via an alternative channel, via an alternative path. Alzheimer's, they need reassurance, constant reassurance. Most of my day is spent, and by the way, I moved my parents and us to a house to live together in order to do this. So I'm actually experiencing this not quite 24/7, but a large part of the day. So that reassurance is absolutely critical. If I don't, she spirals up into a panic. When you're up at a panic, nobody is thinking straight. Okay? If you're waiting for your users to be in the middle of a crisis situation before they understand what they need to do, it's too late. You're going to have to. They're not going to listen. So again, nothing that's especially novel there. I think we all should know that. That's when we're tired, we're busy, overloaded. That's when most likely those errors are going to say. So what can we do to make sure that we're expecting those errors are going to happen under practice, under pressure, and to prioritise the safety over the speed, and make sure that we recognise when those incidents are going to happen, and what can we do to fix the system. By the way, I'm not just talking about a technical system. If we can provide technical support, great, but I'm talking about the behavioural system as well. What can we do to fix the system? Let's not blame the individual. Let's look at the system again. Rob talked most of I could have probably done this talk in about 2 minutes because most of it was covered by Rob, really. And then finally, emotions. That system one thinking. We are so driven by our emotional thinking. And so therefore it's not surprising that is when that's when things can lead to confusions and to problems. So we need to recognise that. We need to recognise that emotional stressors degrade judgment. And so what can we do? Let's try, at the very least, let's remove the blame from errors. I'm not saying that you don't need to have ultimately some HR policies that deal with persistent problems, but and serious problems as well. But I think that I think it's about the language that we're using. If we're threatening people, it's not helping. All right, it's the wrong message that we want to be. So what can we do to turn that and make it of a more positive incentivization to do the right thing rather than constantly telling people to do the wrong thing, which they won't remember anyway. Okay. So key lessons. Design for human fallibility. Don't base our systems on the expectation that people are going to act perfectly as we want them into those documents. They won't. If you design your system on that basis, it's going to fail. Replace judgment with a more structured and habitual. Try and build it into people's habits. Reduce that cognitive load. And let's try and turn that negative view into a much more positive, non-blame-based culture that encourages people to talk about the issues, to report things quickly, and to reflect on what's happened, so that we can then actually, the best learning that we have is actually when things fail. When things go right, we're not learning. It's when things are failing. So we need to actually encourage people to just talk about it and then have a positive view about, well, okay, so what do we do to put that right? And that is my mum and Alzheimer's, and hopefully a little bit of interest on information security. Thank you very much.